And welcome to another edition of our treatment of the International Sunday School lesson. Today's lesson is entitled A Covenant Between Friends. And it's taken from 1 Samuel 18, 1 through 5, and then jumping up to chapters 19, 1 through 7. And today's lesson is lesson number 10 in the summer quarter, and it's for August the 4th, 2019. Now, a little background information about today's lesson. Today's lesson talks about David and his relationship with the family of Saul. And David had an unusual relationship with the family of Saul. He was best friends with one of Saul's sons, and he married one of Saul's daughters. And at times he was considered inside of Saul's mind a hero, a great person in the kingdom. And at other times, Saul's jealousy would overcome him, and he would go after David like he was his worst enemy. And this was an odd kind of situation. And David and also the writers of the Old Testament are very careful about pointing out that David had no animosity towards Saul. David did not usurp the kingdom from him. He did not, the times that he had the opportunity to kill Saul, he did not take it. When Saul finally did die, he was wounded in battle, and he had asked one of his armor bearers to go ahead and to assist him in committing suicide with him being wounded. And David actually had that armor bearer who had assisted King Saul in committing suicide. He had that person executed because he raised his hand against the Lord's anointed. So David was real careful not to reciprocate the kind of animosity that Saul showed him. And today we're going to be talking about the strong friendship between the son of Saul, Jonathan, and young David. Now, our story takes up immediately after the death of Goliath, where David had taken the stones, put it in his slingshot, and had killed Goliath because he was taunting the warriors of Israel. Okay, 1 Samuel 18, 1 through 3. When David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan and David became bound together in close friendship. Jonathan loved David as much as he did his own life. Saul retained David on that day and did not allow him to return to his father's house. Jonathan made a covenant with David, for he loved him as much as he did his own life. So we see here how that David and Jonathan became best friends after the battle with Goliath that David had, because David had proven himself to be a worthy man of war. And Jonathan, if you look through the life of Jonathan valued that very highly. And you can see how Jonathan was also a man of war and had shown a lot of courage in times of conflict. So when Jonathan saw David, who was about his age, in that battle with Goliath and show such courage, it impressed Jonathan. And so Jonathan and David became very best friends. Now, 1 Samuel 18:4, Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with the rest of his gear, including his sword, his bow, and even his belt. So we see here that Jonathan, this was a way of, as Jonathan being the king's son, a way of designating David in this very superior position within the army of Israel, because he was wearing the garments and the armor of a son of the king. And he also too, the swords and the gear were very expensive implements of war. And we see how that Jonathan is actually giving these to equip David to go out and do battle with the people of Israel, and to be a very high-ranking person within the army of the Lord. Now, 1 Samuel 18:5, on every mission on which Saul sent him, David achieved success. So Saul appointed him over the men of war. This pleased not only the army, but also Saul's servants. So we see here how that David began to take a leadership role within the army of the Lord. And he is having good success. And people are beginning to notice that he's having good success. And he is beginning to build his reputation as a man of war within the army. And both the soldiers out in the field were beginning to show David a lot of respect, and also the people of Saul's household, his own servants, were beginning to show David such great respect. Okay, now jumping down to 1 Samuel 19:1. Then Saul told his son Jonathan and all his servants to kill David. But Saul's son Jonathan liked David very much. So there was a change of heart in King Saul. Saul was very arrogant, very needful of praise and respect, to the point to where it was a mental illness. The mental illness is called narcissism. And you can tell by reading the story of King Saul how narcissistic he was. And if anybody upstaged him, how that he would try to destroy them, and how he was so sensitive to what people were saying about him and how they viewed him. And people began to show David so much respect, and Saul was being filled with narcissistic rage at young David. And David was in grave danger because the king was out to get him. And the king had tried several different mechanisms. And finally, he got to the point where he was just real blunt about it. And he said to all of his people and his son to go ahead and kill David. He wanted to just get rid of David. Even though when David was out there fighting with the Philistines, it was actually benefiting the people of God. It was actually benefiting the kingdom of Saul when he was actually having success. But Saul was so filled with narcissistic rage that he did not want David to be successful, because it made David look so good and above what, in Saul's mind, above what the king looked like. So he finally told his son and his servants, go ahead and kill David. Okay, 1 Samuel 19:2 and 3. So Jonathan told David, my father Saul is trying to kill you. So be careful tomorrow morning. Find a hiding place and stay in seclusion. I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are. I will speak about you to my father. When I find out what the problem is, I will let you know. So Jonathan, because he was a righteous young man, wanted to do the right thing. So he warned David that his father had evil intentions toward him. And so he told David to hide and that he would talk to his father and see what the problem was. Okay, 1 Samuel 19:4 through 5. So Jonathan spoke on David's behalf to his father Saul. He said to him, the king should not sin against his servant David, for he has not sinned against you. On the contrary, his actions have been very beneficial for you. He risked his life when he struck down the Philistine, and the Lord gave all Israel a great victory. When you saw it, you were happy. So why would you sin against innocent blood by putting David to death for no reason? So we see here how the righteous Jonathan is trying to reason with his father to do the right thing. And he reminds his father how that David took his own life in his hands and risked his life for the great victory that was done for the people of God. And how that everyone owed David this great debt because of his heroism, and how he had been so selfish or selfless in the way that he went about risking his life over and over again, how the great victories that were being won because David was risking his life to do this, and how it was completely a sin to go after innocent blood like this. And Jonathan is showing his own bravery by doing this because Saul could have went after him. It's not uncommon and unheard of in these royal families for fathers to kill sons and sons to kill fathers. They are so bent out of shape on power and wealth that it's happened over and over and over again in royal bloodlines for that kind of thing to happen. So it would not be unheard of for Saul to have killed his own son, because Saul had already demonstrated his lack of discernment and his lack of integrity by going after David. So Jonathan was taking his life in his own hands. And that's a way sometimes that good friends will do for each other. They will take and risk everything to save a friend. Over and over again, you hear of how that firemen and policemen will risk their lives, and soldiers will risk their lives. They have done studies that soldiers in the foxhole, in the heat of the battle, it's not so much for the loyalty for their country that they're fighting for, but it's for the protection of the person in the foxhole with them. People will stand up for their friends. It's a natural order of things. And when people don't do that, that is an unnatural order of things. And Jonathan was risking everything to take up for David right here. 1 Samuel 19:6. Saul accepted Jonathan's advice and took an oath. As surely as the Lord lives, he will not be put to death. Now, this was something Saul probably was serious about when he said it. But we know as we read further on in the story and further along in the book of Samuel, how that Saul did not live up to this. But at that moment, he had a moment of sanity and made an oath that he would not harm young David. 1 Samuel 19:7 and 8. Then Jonathan called David and told him all these things. Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he served him as he had done formerly. Now once again there was war. So David went out to fight the Philistines. He defeated them thoroughly, and they ran away from him. So it seems like David is restored to his former place. And he is back, things are back to normal. He's been restored. And then the war breaks out again. And David does what he is naturally did. He was a man of war. And he went out there with the people of God, and he began to have great success. And the Philistines even ran away from David. They did not want to face David. Okay? So David's fame was growing and growing because of his good success. 1 Samuel 19:9. Then an evil spirit from the Lord came upon Saul. He was sitting in his house with his spear in his hand while David was playing the lyre. And he threw the spear at King David. So we see here how that how things had degenerated and how Saul's mental state had degenerated, how his unreasonable arrogance and need for praise had drove him to the point of insanity, to where he tried to start killing David again. These rages, because of his arrogance, would just hit him, and he would just go off and try to kill David. Now, a couple of concluding thoughts I want to make. First off, I would strongly encourage every one of us to look closely at the story of Saul and David. Both of these men started off in a low position, and the Lord anointed them to be king over the people of God and had let them be raised up. And they both had had some pretty serious failures. And David overcame his failures. Saul, on the other hand, was consumed with his failures. And the reason being is that David, throughout his entire life, had a humble and meek spirit and was tender-hearted like that. And Saul, on the other hand, was mainly concerned about what other people were saying about him. And it led to Saul's downfall. Even when Samuel gave him that significant rebuke over the not killing everything in that city. Saul's main concern was, what will the people think? You need to go up here and do this sacrifice with me so the people won't think anything bad about me. And then you look when Nathan came to David and rebuked him, David was only concerned about repenting before God and making things right with God. And that's the main difference between those two people. It's the reason why God set David's kingdom up forever, and the reason why Saul was utterly rejected. It was because of his arrogance and his pride, and only being concerned about what people thought about him. The other thing too is that your friends, you need to be loyal to your friends, especially Christians. You know, be loyal to your friends. Have good, strong friends. Seek out good, strong friends. Be a good, strong friend. If a man's going to have friends, he needs to find himself to be friendly. Well, friends, good Lord willing, I'll be back with you next weekend.